what about the safe space like hysteria where people are like, we need safe spaces,
Yeah.
but then it's the same people who are like, why are you protesting us? Like, let us debate. Well, then fucking what is it? Do you want safe spaces or not? Because if you want to have debates or you want to have speeches, like, you can't stop people in Berkeley from coming and protesting you or heckling you.
It's such a fundamental idea that we all know that in order to, if you're going to have a discussion with someone, you have to let that person establish, this is what debates are about, right? Let that person establish their position and then give your counter to that position. This is like so firmly established in the way we communicate and the way we go over ideas. That is essentially the marketplace of ideas. You have your idea, someone has an opposing idea. If you don't let that person establish their idea and you shut it down, and you're throwing rocks and burning cop cars and throwing fucking bricks through Starbucks windows, like, you are feeding the whole resistance to your ideas flames. Like, you're feeding the people that are saying that they're right and you're wrong because you are against free speech.
You're definitely feeding that. Yeah, and people sympathize with like Richard Spencer after he got punched, you know, and that's a problem.
Yeah, it's a fucking problem. Because all you have to do is let those people hang themselves. Give them rope. Let them talk. But you have to have someone qualified. You have to have someone who can have that speech with them. And you can't have the fucking audience shout them down either. It's a disservice to both ideas, both sides.
But I've heard people say, like, is Nazism really an idea worthwhile of putting it in the marketplace of ideas? Like, you're advocating genocide.
Okay, for Richard Spencer. So you mean that guy? Yeah, okay. But if you are going to have someone debate them, you have someone debate them in a venue where let everyone watch it online.
It's like, how do you debate someone that wants to exterminate you? Like, if you're like a black person, you're like, I'm going to debate this guy whose main premise of the argument is you shouldn't exist. It's kind of I've heard people. It's a confusing topic.
But if you don't debate them, if you shut down their speech, if you stop and then they can frame what they were going to say in a very different way. They can gather sympathy with people who are more pro-speech, more pro-free speech than they are anti what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that they still are, like we were saying before, Nazis still have rallies. Like, no one's shutting down these from a government level. So I think the whole censorship thing is not relevant to this situation because that really does mean like the black hand of the state like coming down and blocking you. And instead we have like what we see Antifa blocking like physically these venues, but it's not like these people are blocked from having venues or access or speech platforms. I mean, they're fucking everywhere. It's like, I feel like all over the news, it's Richard Spencer, the dapper Nazi, like giving all these interviews.
Aren't these speeches in like this one place? Aren't they very retro? Like, why even do it that way? Why have an audience? Why have an angry mob yelling outside or even inside?
To create and cultivate these situations so then they could be the martyrs, right? The free speech martyrs. That's exactly what they're doing.
It's a very poor way to go over ideas, though. I think the better way to go over ideas is you have a moderator and two people in a room together, you know? Like that's simple. One person has an allotted time where they can express themselves. Then the other person has an allotted time where they can counter. And you're not allowed to chime in. You're not allowed to interrupt. You're not allowed to in any way disrupt this person's flow of ideas. Then there should be a time set aside where you could go back and forth with each other. And unless you do it that way, you're going to involve the cult of personality. You're going to involve the cheers from the crowds. You're going to involve all these different people that can organize to sway things one way or another. Or all this, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down. And it gets as ridiculous as like Jordan Peterson's speeches. I'm sure you've seen that professor of University of Toronto that doesn't want to use all these made-up gender pronouns, the 78 now accepted gender pronouns. Canada has really weird laws. You know, in Canada they don't have free speech the way we have free speech, and they have a human rights council, and they've decided that these 78 or whatever the fuck they are, however many they decide on, gender pronouns, that if you don't use them, if someone says, you know, I want you to call me Foxkin 26, but for real, like, like that, if you don't do that, you're imposing on their human rights. Other people have debated him and said that that's not how it should be interpreted, but he's like a very staunch critic of Marxism, and he understands the real ideology of Marxism and how it went horribly wrong all throughout the world, throughout history, and that he thinks that what you're trying to do when you're invoking like this, when you're asking the government to tell people what they must or must not say, that you are going down this road, this very dangerous road of cultural Marxism.
But what is cultural Marxism? Because I've heard this said a lot, and I actually have no idea what the hell it means, because Marxism is simply a critique on capitalism. So I don't understand this whole cultural Marxism, like.
Well, let's get the definition.
And how it has anything to do with gender pronouns, but let's check it out.
You'd have to talk to Peterson about how it, but he makes a very compelling argument about how the two of them are connected. And essentially what people are trying to do is control your behavior. And they're trying to, in some way, force you to behave the way they would like you to behave. Even if it's a preposterous thing like making up words and you have to call them this instead of he, she, or even like the people that want to use they, which is, plurals, which is fine. I mean, like, that's a real word, if you want to use it in an incorrect way. And it does get used like, it does use like, if anybody wants to use the bathroom, they can go ahead. You can be using that in a singular term, and it's non-gender specific.
Right.
So there is like open interpretation in the standard use of it in the English language. So pulled up the term cultural Marxism.
I was looking for it. I can't really find a great definition for it. There's a couple, like the Google search says there's a couple things calling it a conspiracy theory, but the Urban Dictionary definition, this isn't like the obvious
social political movement that promotes unreason and irrationality through the guise of various causes, often promoted by so-called social justice. This is a perfect example of it. These causes and their proponents are often contradictory and are almost always never rooted in fact. Indeed, true argument or discussion with proponents of these causes is almost impossible. As most attempts at discourse descend quickly into shouting, name-calling, and chanting of slogans. Well, that's a perfect, otherwise known as the regressive left, a play on the contradictory nature.
I think that this seems to be like a hub of the alt-right, where this is founded on like this reactionary movement on PC culture, on things like the gender pronouns thing. And it seems like there's no real like political ideology behind what is the alt-right other than just a reaction to this, like, I don't want to conform to this progressive whatever cultural Marxism. But to me, I feel like I don't know. It doesn't bother me as much. Like, what bothers me right now is just like the empire fucking killing people in my name, and Trump being like a disgusting war criminal who's flip-flopped on all the shit that he said that he's going to do.
That's a different argument, but you're absolutely right. That's more
But what I'm saying is these people are that upset about leftists. Like, they think leftists are the problem and that cultural Marxism is like ruining society. And it's like, what is this government doing? Like, the empire never stopped when Trump won.
Jordan Peterson he's a progressive. He's a liberal. So the guy who's arguing against cultural Marxism is actually a progressive. He's actually a liberal. I mean, he's not a Republican. He's definitely not alt-right. He's Canadian, so they obviously have different parties up there. But he's not an alt-right guy. He's a professor. I mean, he's not. He just sees that there's a bunch of people on campus that are trying to control the way other people communicate.
It's just such an isolated. I totally hear that, and I see where people are really upset about that. And it just, I see SJWs and leftists are ruining everything. And to me, it just seems like such an isolated, like totally inconsequential thing to what's going on in the rest of the world, and especially what Trump is ramming down everyone's throats. It's like, is this really the main issue here?
No, it's not. But I agree with you to a certain extent. But to not address that or to write it off, it empowers the people that are fighting against it. Because you're ignoring it. Like, to them, it's a giant issue. The issue of free speech, the issue of not having people enforce whatever ideology that they have on you, that you have to behave the way they want you to and communicate they want you to, or you're a bigot, or you're a Nazi, like punch a Nazi.
Meanwhile, there's actual Christian evangelicals employing top-down policy that's actually telling people, here's how education is going to be run, here's how you're going to be indoctrinated. Like, that's what I feel like we're really missing the boat here. All these like new atheists who agree with what you're saying, like don't want to be policed and are more like in line with Trump. How come they're not speaking out against like the Christian evangelical hold over this administration?
Well, which ones are you talking about?
Mike
like,
Pence.
Not...
Oh,
no,
I mean,
who's not speaking out?
You know what?
I
don't know. I just kind of said that in the ether, but I guess I just haven't seen enough critique of Trump for bringing in this religious fanaticism.
Oh, I've seen nothing but.
Really?
Nothing but.
Oh, that's great.
Maybe
that's really good to hear.
Maybe I'm in different circles.
Oh, that's great.
But
so people are talking about that.
Well, what's weird is that people think that Trump is so inept, they almost would prefer Mike Pence and even Ted Cruz.
That's terrifying.